Hello and welcome back to a Slice, a Spice, and a Dice movie reviews. Now today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This series that I do, like movies that ruin my childhood, that kind of a thing, this is me retelling a story of what I consider in my lifetime to be horror film classics that like shaped my childhood love of the horror genre. And this movie today that we're going to be discussing is Pet Sematary, the 1989 version of it. It was adapted from a Stephen King novel, and I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on the book after I do the story time. So this is just that. It's a story time. It's me retelling it. It's like a campfire type thing for me. And that's that. If you've never seen this and you don't want spoiler alerts, this is not the video for you, because there's going to be tons of spoiler alerts. That being said, I'm not going to tell every last detail of it. I'm just going to retell the story in my own little way. But with that being said, let this be a forewarning that we are entering spoiler alert nation. Okay, so in this movie we see that Lewis Creed, as well as his wife Rachel and their two children, Ellie and Gage, have moved from the big city to the country, a rural town in Maine. Stephen King's always set in Maine and that kind of a thing. This is nothing new. So they're moving there. He's going to be his little doctor self. And they move into this cute house that's in this cute piece of property. But it lies right off of a road that is like a major thoroughfare for these huge tanker trucks to be driving through, which sadly will play a role later on. Now, very quickly, the neighbor is brought into the scene. His name is Judd. Most of us will remember him, and you can't really unsee it type thing, but regardless, to me, Judd is like, he keeps the story going. He's the narrator, if you will. He is facilitating everything, like the little historian of the world that Stephen King has created for us. So one weekend, the family, the Creeds, they go out of town except for Lewis, and that's going on. He's hanging out. He's doing the single guy thing for the weekend. And sadly, their cat Church will get hit by one of these trucks. They find his corpse in the grass, stuck to it. It's disgusting. And this is where we are introduced to Pet Sematary. Now, there is a cemetery that is behind the Creed's house. It's like where the neighborhood kids and whatnot buried their pets that have all been fallen victim to this road, and there's a lot of them. So Judd's like, you know what, boy, I'm gonna take you down to the Pet Sematary so we can give it a proper burial. But when they get there, Judd's like, oh no, now I'm taking you to the real cemetery. So Judd takes Lewis on this huge hike through the woods. You feel like it's going on for days. And Lewis is like, where are we going? Side note, the guy who played Lewis in this, to me, he has like one emotion through the entire film. One expression, one tone of voice, the whole thing where he's just like, oh my gosh, my son just died, you know, that type thing. Anyways, so they're going to the woods. They finally get to where they're going, and it's like this, what appears to be like an old Indian ancient burial ground type thing. And Judd's like, now listen, I say, you're gonna have to bury the cat on your own now. So Lewis goes along with this. He buries the cat. He can tell it's just not right, but he does it anyways. And then they head back. Now, also, might I just say on this note, if things have gone so poorly that we will learn from Judd later on with this whole thing, why in God's name would you have done this again, even with the cat? I mean, I just don't get it. So later that night, Church will come back, but Church, he ain't Church no more. Okay, something's clearly like not right with the cat. He's like this evil little version of Church. And so Lewis is like, what? You know, like, what's going on? This is crazy. And so he's like, hey, Judd, remember that dead cat? Yeah, well, it's here. Tried to attack me. Not so sure about the dead cat. And Judd's like, well, now listen, boy, I'm gonna tell you a little story, and it goes a little something like this. So Judd will explain the powers of this place and what takes place with it, all that. And then Lewis asks the obvious question, has anyone ever been buried there? And Judd's like, oh my good Lord, Jesus and crackers, you know. And he's like, no, my God, don't ever think such a thing. No one's ever been buried there. It would be horrible, yada, yada, yada. And so we just kind of go on. So now, fast forward, we're going to talk about a scene that I was like, oh my God, I'm still scarred. Let's work through the trauma. So one day Lewis is working at the hospital, and all of a sudden a patient comes in. It's this young man, and I believe he was riding a bike and got hit, something like that. And I mean, he's covered in blood. He's got blood coming from his skull. It's bad, y'all. And that part right there disturbed me, because I was like, oh my God, it's so real. As a kid, at least to me it was. So they're trying to save him, all this type of stuff. It ain't happening. And so there's a scene where Lewis is like in the little hospital room or whatever with a curtain pulled around him, and you know, he's kind of just reflecting on, wow, like this guy had his whole life ahead of him type thing. Well, the guy's name is Pascow. Well, Pascow leans up and like says something to Lewis, and it's scary, and he looks frightening, and it's bad. And of course Lewis is like, oh my God, you know what? Now, what Pascow is doing is he's warning Lewis about this burial ground. And Pascow will continually come back throughout this film at different times and warn him, Ellie, everyone. He's like, look, I'm telling you, that ground, it ain't right. The ground is spoiled. So that being said, again, everything just continues on. Now, again, we're going to go right into a scene that is still traumatizing. And y'all already know, if you've watched this, what I'm about to say. So next, you know, we see a family picnic going on. Judd is there, and they're doing this. It's like a little birthday party. They're hanging out. Now, their little picturesque farmhouse has like a pretty big yard to it. But remember, that highway is like right there. So they're all kind of distracted, and there's a kite, and Gage is chasing after it. Well, Judd's finally like, Lewis, the boy, go get the boy. Well, you hear a truck coming off, and you're like, oh my God. And Lewis is running, but Gage runs into the road, and it's just too late. And you see his little bloody shoe get kicked, and Lewis is like, whoa. And everyone's freaking out and crying and all this stuff, and it's like, oh my God. You know, I'm like, there was a line, Stephen King crossed it. Okay. Now, obviously, this part is like absolutely horrendous. And I mean, even at the funeral, you're just like, oh my God. And Rachel's father and mother come, and the father's like blaming Lewis at the funeral, and they get in a fist fight, and they end up knocking the little casket down, and you see Gage's hand, and I'm like, can you imagine? Oh my God. So there's that. So all that's going on with Gage. Now, you already know in the background what Lewis is kind of thinking, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's go ahead and just jump to, I'm going to go ahead and say it, I think this scene was the most disturbing to me, probably still freaks me out. So one evening, Rachel is talking to Lewis. Now, obviously this is kind of in the same window of time, and she's kind of having this confession moment about something from her past, and you know, like, let's work through this. And this is about her sister Zelda. Now, of course, during this time, Zelda was a game to me. Anytime I think of that, I think of the Nintendo game. But regardless, it's just not that common of a name, so there's that to begin with. So Rachel is describing this scene from her childhood that was very traumatic. It involves her sister Zelda, who has spinal meningitis. So Rachel's describing this scene, and they're showing this, and just the visuals of Zelda, I'm like, oh my God. You know, she's just so scary looking. And basically Rachel's like, my parents left me alone one night to watch my other siblings and Zelda, and Zelda was basically bedridden at this point. I mean, she would look like a skeleton. And you know, Rachel's describing, like, you know what, she had become such a burden, like we were just kind of over her. And she's like, I resented her, you know, because that's just, it is what it is. And so at one point Zelda starts choking on what looks to me like baby food, and that part gets me every time, because I'm like, that is so gross. And Rachel as a child is like patting her back, and I mean, it's nothing but bones, and she basically lets Zelda die and choke to death. And she's like, I wanted her to die, you know. And I mean, that alone, the trauma, I'm just like, oh my God. And so Lewis is like, your parents never should have done that. Tonight you're getting a Valium. And that's about as much emotion you're going to see out of him in that. So that scene bothers me. Zelda, the sister, the look on her face, she will come back to haunt Rachel, and it's just so creepy to me. Okay, so back to the whole Gage stuff. So like I said, Gage is passed, got hit by the truck, funeral, her parents, you know, they get in the fight with Lewis, or the dad does, whatever. So there's that. So Rachel takes Ellie. She's going to go back home with her parents to, you know, heal, whatever. Now she's begging Lewis. She's like, come on, baby, come on with me. And he's like, no, I'm going to stay here. So they leave. he's there. Now you already know, you don't have to be a psychic to guess what Mr. Lewis is thinking. So one of those evenings, him and Judd are having beers and stuff, and Judd already knows. Okay, he already knows, okay, because the cat's been coming around, all this type of stuff. So Judd's like, Lewis, you remember how I told you that no one had ever been buried there? Well, that was a lie. And Judd recounts the story of Timothy, a boy named Timothy or Timmy, something like that. And this is World War II, and he had died in the service, and his father was just heartbroken, devastated, all this. So his father took him and buried him in the burial ground. Well, sure enough, Timmy comes back to life, and in the movie they show him like coming back up. And this is like Stephen King was doing zombie stuff before zombie stuff was zombie stuff, and he is just so disturbing. And Judd is telling Lewis how he just wasn't right. He was this evil thing, and basically some of the townsfolk, some of Judd's friends knew, like, we can this is not right. So they go to the house, to the father's house and everything, and they're going to basically burn it up. But their plans go awry, and the son pulls the father back into the house, and they burn to death. And it's so creepy, and they did such a good job at making the son just look, like gross and zombie, and just part of it too is the fact that they're not calling them zombies. It's almost like this thing of, it's a reanimated, it's a zombie thing, but they're not zombies, you know what I'm saying? So it's that whole murkiness of that I think adds to the flavor of this film. So Judd's obviously telling Lewis this to avoid him from doing what we know he's gonna do, okay? So Lewis is like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about doing that a little, Gage. Y'all, they can't even get to the next damn scene quick enough, and he is at that damn gravesite. We already know. He digs Gage up, he takes Gage, he buries him in that damn thing, and then he goes back home. Well, y'all know this is not good. Now, mind you, Ellie is having nightmares at her grandparents' house, and she's like, Pascow, someone like named Pascow is warning me about something. And now somehow Rachel knows that this isn't good, and so there's some little like weird things that go on in the movie that I'm like, and so Rachel all of a sudden is like, oh my god, I have to go home. Well, it's a damn good thing she does, okay, because so let me tell you what, she's gonna be walking into some carnage. So just like the cat, Gage comes back later that night alive, but he ain't Gage. He first goes to his house and he gets a scalpel out of his dad's little doctor bag. And then he heads right to the damn source of the problem, Mr. Judd. And he doesn't waste any time in taking Judd out. And so he does that. He kills the friendly neighbor, for God's sakes. There's just no shame. But anyways, so remember, Rachel's on her way home, right? So she gets home, she finds him. Now she's having these flashbacks of Zelda, and Zelda calling her and Gage, and she sees Gage and she's like, oh my god, Gage, my little boy. And he's like, Mommy, I want to come hug you. Well, you already know what's going to happen. He's going to go up there and kill his mother. What does a reanimated little baby do besides kill their mother? Let's just be honest here. So now Lewis gets up later. He's still alive. He hasn't dealt with this aftermath. He feels some morphine things. So I think he was finally like, you know what? I gotta do what's right. So first things first, he kills that damn cat. He's like, first thing, you got to go, okay? Then, he does encounter his son. He does the same thing. He lays him down. Now, during this, he also finds Rachel's body at this point, and he's like, oh my god. So he sets the house on fire. So isn't it interesting, the full circle that we get here? But he takes Rachel, and he's like, it'll be better this time. It was like, I'm burying her right after, so it'll be better this time. And Pascow's there, and he's like, don't, the ground is soiled. But he walks right through him, and Pascal's like, no. And so he goes, he buries Rachel, he comes back. We already know a little bit later, Rachel comes to the door and she's like, honey, I'm home. She has a knife. You already know what's going to happen. And there we go. And so the demise of the entire family over this, and the poor little neighbor too. So here's the thing. So that's my little retelling of it. So this was a book. And if you watch the story I did about Misery is my all-time favorite Stephen King book, period, end of story. Pet Sematary comes in close because I actually was able to finish the whole thing. Now, yeah, I'm talking 20 some years ago. It was drawn out in parts, but I was able to get through it. It was not as quick paced. So Pet Sematary is probably my second favorite one because Misery, just nothing compares to it, for me at least. So there's that. Obviously, movies never do the books justice, and I think a lot of Stephen King movies, I mean, some of them are really good, and some of them are like, eh. Like I said, the remake of this movie, no, don't even go see it. If you saw this one, there's no need to see it. Maybe the acting's a little bit better, because even going back and watching this one now, where I was like, oh my god, the actor, I mean, the guy who played Lewis, I mean, it was not a good performance. I mean, bless his heart, maybe he's gotten better, but, you know, I don't know what direction the director was giving him, but, you know, I just felt like he was like, serve me flat, serve me cardboard cutout. That's what we're going for in this scene. Okay, y'all, so that's it. If there's other stories that you want to hear me do like a Storytime version of and talk about it, let me know here in the comments and I'll be happy to do it. Thank you for checking this out. If you want to hear me talk about true crime and true crime updates, be sure to check out my other channel, Report Live from a Sofa. And until my next movie binge, I'll see them.